What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Thursday, September 9th.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, we have a 4-game slate tonight, and our picks crushed it last night. Not a single 0 out of 15 picks, so that was fantastic. So let's see if we can keep that momentum going, although it's going to be a little bit harder with a 4-game slate. Let's take a look at the pitcher position. I like Oscar Yanoa with a 2% pitching advantage over the Washington Nationals. Oscar Yanoa, he's only giving up a .475 OPS versus lefties. Now he's facing 3 lefties here tonight, but also he's giving up a .797 OPS versus righties, facing 4 righties here tonight. Now the Nationals have hit 3 of his last 15 pitches, so a small sample size, but a good start. And Oscar Yanoa is 8,800 FanDuel salary. He's 200 less on DraftKings, projected at 27 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 30 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 20, 25, and 40 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He has an ERA of 3.19. His record is 4-5 on the season, pitching an average of 82 pitches per game. So I like Oscar Yanoa here versus the Washington Nationals. Now guys, there's not a lot of good pitchers on this slate. I mean, if you want to pay up a little bit, you could go with Jose Barrios or Carlos Hernandez. Looks like he's in a decent spot, but this is going to be a tough slate to find a good pitcher. So just go ahead and roll the dice with one of those guys. Jose Barrios is probably the safest pick, although he's facing the Yankees. He does only give up a .617 OPS versus righties, and he's facing 6 righties here tonight. So he's got an 8% pitching advantage. The splits are great. Now, the Yankees have hit 17 of his last 58 pitches. That's a .293 batting average, and he's 9,100 FanDuel salary and 100 more on DraftKings. Projected at 22.8 fantasy points here tonight. That's a little bit low. I expect him to put up at least 30 fantasy points in this one. He has an ERA of 3.55. His record is 10-7 on the season, pitching an average of 95 pitches per game, averaging 34 fantasy points per game, and he scored 42, 64, and 15 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Jose Barrios here versus the New York Yankees. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. I like Freddie Freeman with a 23% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Eric Fedde. Freddie Freeman is batting 30% better versus righty pitchers, batting a 1.081 OPS versus righties, and Eric Fedde is giving up a .763 OPS versus lefties. Freddie Freeman is 4 for 12, batting a .333 batting average and a .889 OPS versus Fedde. He's 3,900 FanDuel salary, 2,100 more on DraftKings. So I love that FanDuel price. Projected at 12.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 15, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 10 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Freddie Freeman here versus Eric Fedde. Now I also like Ryan Mountcastle with a 4% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Carlos Hernandez. Ryan Mountcastle, he bats a little bit better versus righty pitchers, batting a .824 OPS versus righties. And Carlos Hernandez is giving up a .758 OPS versus righties. Now there's no at-bats versus Hernandez yet, and Ryan Mountcastle is $3,500 FanDuel salary, $900 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 28, 6, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Ryan Mountcastle here versus Carlos Hernandez. Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. I got a couple value plays for you here. I like Ramon Urias, batting against that low salary pitcher, Carlos Hernandez. Ramon Urias, he's batting a .859 OPS versus righties, and Carlos Hernandez is giving up a .758 OPS versus righties. And Ramon Urias is 2 for 2, batting a 2 OPS versus Hernandez, and he's only $2,400 FanDuel salary and only $500 more on DraftKings. So I like that price on both sites, and he's projected at 9.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 10, 9, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Ramon Urias here versus Carlos Hernandez. Okay, another value play. I like Brendan Rodgers with a 68% batting advantage over Ranger Suarez. Brendan Rodgers is batting 35% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .674 OPS versus lefties, and Ranger Suarez is he's pitching his worst ball versus righty batters, 33% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1.015 OPS versus righties. Now there's no at-bats versus Suarez yet, and Brendan Rodgers is $2,800 FanDuel salary, $1,100 more on DraftKings, projected at 8.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 0, and 15 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Brendan Rodgers here versus Ranger Suarez.
Real quick guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. I like Austin Riley with a 15% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Eric Fetty. Austin Riley is batting 8% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .831 OPS versus righties. And Eric Fetty, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, giving up a .821 OPS versus righties. Now I like this pick because Austin Riley is 5 for 12, batting a .417 batting average and a .917 OPS versus Fetty. He's $3,700 FanDuel salary, $2,000 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 3, and 29 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 10 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Austin Riley here versus Eric Fetty. Okay, now a stud pick for you on this small slate. I like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. batting against Nestor Cortez Jr. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., He's batting a .880 OPS versus lefty pitchers. And Nestor Cortes Jr., he's giving up a .994 OPS versus righties. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is 1 for 2 with a 1 OPS versus Cortes. He's 4,500 FanDuel salary, 900 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 14 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 25, 3, and 25 fantasy points in his last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. here versus Nestor Cortes Jr. We got a matchup of the juniors. Okay, let's take a look at the shortstop position. I like Trevor Story with a 57% batting advantage over Ranger Suarez. Trevor Story is batting 24% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a 1.010 OPS versus lefties. And Ranger Suarez, he pitches his worst ball by far to righty batters, 33% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1.015 OPS versus righties. Now, Trevor Story is 0 for 1 versus Suarez. He's 3,700 FanDuel salary, 1,200 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 10, 22, and 6 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Trevor Story here versus Ranger Suarez. Okay, now here's a value play for you. I like Didi Gregorius with a 30% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Antonio Senzatella. Didi Gregorius is batting 22% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .784 OPS versus righties. And Antonio Senzatella, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 9% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .784 OPS versus lefties. I like this pick because Didi Gregorius is 2 for 4, batting 500 with a 1.250 OPS versus Senzatella. And he's only 2,700 FanDuel salary. He's 1,300 more on DraftKings, projected at 10 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 6, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Didi Gregorius here versus Antonio Senzatella. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. I like Adam Duval with a 15% batting advantage over the low salary pitcher Eric Fedde. Adam Duval is batting 8% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .819 OPS versus righties. And Eric Fedde, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 7% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .821 OPS versus righties. And I like this pick because Adam Duval is 7 for 12, batting a .583 batting average and a 1.893 OPS versus Fedde. So he has fantastic batter versus pitcher matchup here, and he's 3,500 FanDuel salary, 1,100 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.6 fantasy points here tonight, and he's averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season, and he's been on fire, scoring 19, 29, and 26 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 10 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So this pick's got a lot going for him. So I like Adam Duval here versus Eric Fedde. Okay, now here's another value play. Take a look at Randall Grichuk batting against Nestor Cortes Jr. Randall Grichuk is batting 13% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .816 OPS versus lefties, and Nestor Cortes Jr. is giving up a .994 OPS versus righties. And Randall Grichuk is 2 for 4 with a 2 OPS versus Cortez. One of those hits is a home run, and the other one's a double. And he's only $2,600 FanDuel salary, only $300 more on DraftKings. So I like that price on both sites. Projected at 9.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 0, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Randall Grichuk here versus Nestor Cortez Jr. Now, Hunter Dozier and Garrett Hampson, those are another couple value plays that are in decent spots here tonight. But the value play that I really like, only because of his batter versus pitcher matchup and his super low salary, take a look at Brett Gardner with a 34% batting advantage over Jose Barrios. Brett Gardner is batting 22% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .725 OPS versus righties, and Jose Barrios, he pitches 12% worse to lefties as he does righties, giving up a .703 OPS versus lefties. So the reason I like this pick is because Brett Gardner is 5 for 12, batting a .417 batting average and a .962 OPS versus Barrios. And he's only $2,300 FanDuel salary and the same price on DraftKings. He's projected at 9.5 fantasy points here tonight. Now he's only averaging 6 fantasy points per game on the season, but he scored 26, 6, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Brett Gardner as a value play here versus Jose Barrios.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.